Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever, whenever you are listening to this. We hope you are having a great day. I am Nick Vete. On the screen beside me is Mr. Brian Ramos, and this is Pause and Pals. And on this episode, we are breaking down everything March Madness, getting ready for that big dance, the the NCAA tournament kicking off on Thursday with the play-in games. I'm excited, Brian. This is arguably my favorite time of the year to be a sports fan. There's so much going on. We've got the tournament. We've got the second half of the NBA. We've got NFL free agency kicking off. We've got the MLB season getting ready to start soon. There's just so much going on, headlined by March Madness.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I mean, especially this year, because COVID canceled the tournament last year. We have no idea what to expect, and usually there's kind of a clear-cut favorite, but honestly this year it's up for grabs.
I agree, and it's very exciting, especially with that year off. The first thing I want to start with, though, because of that year off, would be the COVID implications that obviously prevented the tournament from happening this year and have been a hindrance on the college basketball season from start to finish. So obviously recently we've had the conference tournaments taking place. Duke was unable to participate. As a result, they weren't able to play in the tournament. Virginia also could not play in their conference tournament. Kansas could not play in their conference tournament. So, I mean, what do we think here to start? I mean, are these conference tournaments validated? Do you think this affected the seeding at all? How do you think this all played out?
I mean, I definitely think there's some cases to be made for it. I mean, Duke had a bad year regardless, so they were most likely not going to get in the tournament unless they won the ACC. And even with that, I don't know how they were going, if they were going to, because I'm a UNC fan, and UNC had an up and down year, and they blew out Duke the second time they played. But I think it definitely impacts the seeding or the way teams handle this, because you see how it happened with the UConn woman today, with UConn's head coach is going to be out for their 2 games, and so the way COVID is going to be handling the NCAA is the 4 1 seeds from the NIT tournament will jump into March Madness if a team gets COVID and has to drop out. Because if you get COVID throughout the tournament, you're done. They're not going to postpone it for you. You have to drop out. So hypothetically, we just use Gonzaga for an example. If they get COVID, Louisville would slide in because they're the first replacement team. And then the other 3 replacement teams in order are Colorado State, St. Louis, and Ole Miss.
And it's one of those things too, where it's I get that the NCAA has this strict schedule that they're putting in place and everything like that, and they're going to try and get everything done. But to me, if there's a positive test, in the Sweet 16 or the Elite 8, or God forbid, the Final Four, or even right before the final, it's something like that. I feel at that point, if these teams have battled through so much, won all these games to get there, I feel it's one of those things where you have to find a way to get their game in, especially if it's a late game like the Elite 8 or the Final Four or something like that. So that's where things stand with COVID. Ryan ran it down with what the replacement circumstances are going to be prior to the round of 64. Should a team test positive either today or tomorrow? Hopefully none of that happens. But as of right now, we're going to get into some bracket breakdown. So I'm pulling up my bracket on my end. So, if you're a follower of the March Madness bracket, Brian and I are going to be breaking it down. Get your pencils out, get your pens out. Time to fill out your bracket here. So we start in the West region. Gonzaga is the 1 seed. Iowa is the 2 seed. Any matchups you have your eye on, Brian?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just pulling up my bracket right now. So in the West, I think the most important, the biggest toss-up matchup is Virginia and Ohio. Virginia has been an up and down team this year. They've had their own little COVID struggles, hence having to get out of the ACC tournament. Though I don't know if they've been practicing. I don't know if they're going to be rusty. And Ohio has been they are definitely a dark horse candidate for if you're looking for the upsets. If you're considering an upset, I would potentially look at this Virginia Ohio game. I forgot the point guard for Ohio, but he's been balling out, having an amazing year, averaging around 13 points. Out of the upset teams, he's definitely a team I could watch. And that, I think, in the round of 64, those first round games, I think that's probably the best matchup. Or maybe Oklahoma, Missouri. That's another good matchup to watch.
To me, like if there's a toss up here, I look at VCU Oregon as a little bit of a toss up because I get that Oregon obviously playing in the Pac-12, it's a tougher conference than VCU has to deal with on their regular season schedule. But I still think that could be an interesting matchup. The other thing that I'm very interested in is Creighton getting blown out in their conference championship game against Georgetown, against a Georgetown team that we'll get to them in a little bit, but I'm looking at how Creighton's going to bounce back. Recently
Mhm.
they've had some issues with their coach, Greg McDermott, who, came out in a post-game press conference and said, everybody needs to stay on the plantation. Some comments that were viewed as potentially being racist, as potentially, not being considerate of Black history along those lines. And he even came out and said, like, I'll resign if I have to. He put in his resignation, but the players actually came out and had his back and said that they didn't want him to leave, that they wanted him to stay. So he's still there. So I'm very interested to see how this Creighton team bounces back after a tough loss, after everything that's gone on with their coach. And I could see this as potentially being something that almost motivates them and it helps them find a way to make a potential deep run in this tournament. But I'm going to say the team that I absolutely have my eye on in this region is Iowa. They are a team throughout the season. I know that they've struggled at times throughout the season. They've had their big wins, but at the same time, they've also had their losses against other good teams. I think they're a team. Joe Wieskamp's there. Luca Garza's there. Jordan Bohannon, their senior point guard, is there as well. They've got playmakers there. They've got Luca Garza, maybe player of the year. He's going to be, in the running with Cade Cunningham. They're a team that I absolutely have my eye on as potentially making a deep run in this region and potentially being my team to make it in the Final Four here. So that's my breakdown. What's your overall takeaway on this region?
Uh, Overall in this region, it's, I mean, I think like honestly, I think the best teams in in the region are the 1 and the 3, Kansas and Gonzaga. Gonzaga, undefeated. They have like 3 stars. Jalen Suggs, who's a top 5 NBA draft pick. They have the Florida transfer guard, Andrew Nemhard. They have Drew Tissey. They have a solid all-around team. And Kansas, they started out the season not too hot because of COVID. Like they didn't had like all mostly new players. And they're going to be without David McCormick, who's one of their best big men. But if they can get past, well, I expect them to beat Eastern Washington. But then if they can get past USC, assuming that they beat the winner of the Wichita State Drake play-in game, I could see Kansas making a deep run. With my problems with Iowa is that just like with Luca Garza, like when they lose, it's because he doesn't have a good game when he versus like the better known players. Like he beats up on like his other like on the weaker competition, and he has the great games. But then when he gets truly tested, that's when they kind of like have his issues and doubts. And like people have said like they don't think they see his style of play working in the NBA. But I mean, overall, as the Western Conference, I think it's good. It could be better because there's a lot of just inconsistency within the conference. I definitely don't think it's the best conference in March Madness, though, in this bracket.
Yeah,
In the
my,
region.
my takeaway, I definitely don't see it as the best conference, but at the same time, I think that for all these teams, the higher seeds, there's a lot of winnable games. I know you brought up Virginia, and I could see that potentially being an upset as well. But overall, for the most part, I think that this is a region that's going to have a low amount of upsets. And I think, like you said, Gonzaga, Kansas, and obviously, like I mentioned, I'm high on Iowa. I think they're gonna, cruise through most of this bracket, and I just don't see a lot of upsets. So that being said, unless you have anything else to add, I think we can move down to the East region.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll start off here in the East region. A team that I actually really like is LSU. If you looked at their season as a whole, they had their ups and downs. They had some good games against decent teams, but throughout the season they never really gotten that kind of consistent groove. And then they put on a good showing in their conference tournament. They got all the way to the finals. They went up against Alabama. Alabama ultimately beat them, but it was a close game throughout. And LSU is a team that I think they have a lot of players who can take over a game, which I think is something that in this March Madness where it's one and done, there's no series, anything like that. It's you win and you advance. I think that's a factor that's going to be huge for this LSU team. And I could potentially see them making a run and even getting past Michigan. I would go as far to say I could potentially see that being an upset game, an 8 against a 1, because I like guys like Trendon Wofford. They have the freshman, his name's slipping my mind here, Cameron Thomas, who's also a freshman. He's putting up over 22 points a game. They have playmakers. Javante Smart has been there for a while now. So I see LSU is a team that I could see potentially making a deep run as a mid seed.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I personally believe the East is wide open. I mean, Michigan, great year, hands down. Like, I'm not taking that away from them. Like, they deserve the one seed in the East region. But without Isaiah Livers, who's arguably their best player, I mean, they also have Franz Wagner, but I don't know if that's enough to carry around. And there's so many sleeper teams. Like you mentioned, LSU, I believe, is a sleeper team that could easily take the East. Um, Florida State, Scotty Barnes, who even comes off the bench. Like, he's the guy that he doesn't start, but he always finishes the game. Like, Florida State had a great year this year. Georgetown got hot around the right time, and I'm a firm believer in riding with a team that gets hot in the second half because they carry that momentum. And I'm also a firm believer of great coaching will take you far because just their experience in Patrick Ewing, obviously one of the best Nick players of all time, so he knows the game of
And when
basketball.
you talk about great coaching as well, I mean, we could talk about Michigan State, who gets in as an 11 seed, and I mean they're going to be going up against a BYU team who really hasn't had any quality opponents playing out of their conference. And I like what you said, the fact that this region is just wide open. And I mean, I could see Michigan State as a team too that if they can get past LSU, I could see them making a run as well. And I'll say the same for Texas. Shaka Smart there as their head coach won their conference tournament. I could also see them making a deep run.
Yeah, I could also see Texas, like Big 12. Honestly, the Big 12 has probably been, and you've seen it by the seedings, probably the best conference in basketball this year, hands down, like no debate.
That or the Big Ten. I would agree with that.
Mm. And then UConn, they could be a sneaky tournament team. Same with Maryland. Like, honestly, I could see that game, whoever wins that game, potentially going deep. And Alabama, like, I mean, they're playing our MAC winner, the Iona Gales, but coached by Rick Pitino, so that could be interesting. But Alabama, like, they have Javon Quinterly, the 5-star Villanova transfer, and Alabama. I haven't seen this Alabama team like good and fast-paced play since they had Colin Sexton. So I think they could potentially be a sleeper in the East.
It's definitely an interesting draw. And, I mentioned it before, but I really like how you say this region is just wide open because I brought up LSU as a team I could see making a run. I think, I'm not saying Georgetown's going to get to the Final Four or anything like that, but riding the hot hand, that 5-12 matchup, I could totally see that as an upset as well. And then I brought up Michigan State. I think Texas is a team that where they're situated, the schedule the draw that they have, playing with the momentum that they have too of winning the Big 12, arguably the best conference in college basketball. I think they're primed to also potentially make a deep run in this tournament.
Mm-hmm.
So, with that being said, shall we move over to the other side of the bracket?
Yeah. Do you want to start with the South first or the Midwest?
Let's start with the South. We'll go back up top. Baylor's the 1 seed there. You can kick it off if you'd like.
All right. So for the South, Baylor, the 1 seed, rightfully deserved. I mean, they've been the second best team in the country in every statistic except the net, which is pretty much just like they look at strength of schedule, which is the main reason why they had the Baylor over Gonzaga. But I mean, I think this could be the best conference, honestly, because they have Baylor, who's one of the best defensive teams, and they're amazing guards with Jared Butler and Davion Mitchell. They also have Mark Vital, who's 6'9", but just the way how physical and tough he is, he plays like he's 7 foot. UNC, as I mentioned, who got hot around the right time, and Roy Williams, established coach, and they're one of the best teams in the country in terms of rebounding, and I think they're the best in the country in offensive rebounding. They have Villanova. I mean, they're usually good, but without Colin Gillespie with a torn Achilles, I believe, and their third best player, I don't even know. Like, that could be an upset with Winthrop, honestly. But
I'm looking at that game and thinking, you look at Winthrop, and I mean, yeah, they come from random conference in NCAA, but
mhm.
the fact that you put 24 games in front of them and they're able to win 21 of them, that's nothing to slouch at. And you're completely right, considering the fact that Villanova is without Connor Gillespie, who was no doubt their best player, and they're banged up aside from that as well. If you're, if you're filling out your bracket and you're looking for upsets, that's absolutely a game that's going to be circled on a lot of people's brackets as a potential upset.
And then I also believe Texas Tech is a solid team. Mac McClung, the Georgetown transfer, he's been balling out doing his thing. Arkansas, Moses Moody, he's going to be a lottery pick most likely in the NBA. He's been good, and Ohio State is just a solid all around team. Like, there's definitely a lot of competition in this region, but the best first round game, I think, in terms of like the actual game, is going to be the 7-10 Florida Gators and the Virginia Tech Hokies. I mean, both play different styles of basketball. I mean, Florida could be a huge knock on them because they're without their star player, Keontae Johnson, because he collapsed from what I believe is a heart condition and hasn't against Tennessee and hasn't played since. But they still have depth. And Terrence Mann, good point guard, although he didn't play too well in that SEC game where Florida lost. But it's definitely solid region.
The other thing I have an eye on too is the fact that, you look at a team like Purdue, who, they're very well rounded, but there's no, necessarily like alpha male on the team. But the fact that they're going up against North Texas, I'm not going to sit here and tell you like I know a lot about North Texas, but I also brought up the fact that I could see Villanova getting upset in the first round. So if you're a team like Purdue and you could possibly draw North Texas and Winthrop in your first two rounds, and then a team that's not really talked about a lot in Purdue potentially having a draw against Baylor, and that would really be your first potential, game against a tough seed in the tournament. I could see that as being a huge boost for that Purdue team, a team that not a lot of people are talking about. I'm not saying they're going to upset Baylor, but I'm saying that's a path could potentially be taken. And you brought up Ohio State before, the team that drew the 2 seed in this bracket as well. I see them, playing in the tough Big Ten conference, physical conference. I think going up against teams like Florida or Virginia Tech or potentially Arkansas down the road, I think that's going to be huge for, I think their physical nature and just the style of basketball they play, just well-rounded in all facets of their game. I think that they're a team that could potentially be primed for a run to come out of the South as well. So you're right. There's a lot of interesting teams in this region of the bracket. It's definitely going to be one to watch. I disagree. I don't think it's the best region. I think the one we're about to talk about is the best one. But anything else you want to add about the South?
Well, yeah, the Midwest is a very good conference too. It's honestly a toss-up in my opinion. I mean, now that I think the Midwest has the best like top teams, but I think the South generally has like the more well-rounded.
Fair. So why don't we transition into the Midwest right now? And I'll start it off. So Illinois has arguably been playing the best basketball of any team in the country these past, week or so. Outside of that, there's some other great teams here. Houston, a team from, a mid-conference that's had a great season, only 3 losses on the year. We've also got West Virginia, coached by Bob Huggins. They've got playmakers, Miles McBride, Taz Sherman, plenty of guys on their roster as well. They're not, I think it was whoever was calling the Big 12 tournament. It was, I think it was Fran Fraschilla said, this isn't your grandma's West Virginia team anymore. They're a team that, they can score offense as well as shut you down on defense. And then we look at Oklahoma State as well, who made it to the they made it to the conference finals of the Big 12, a team that's got Cade Cunningham, who could possibly be the player of the year and probably going to be the number 1 overall pick in the NBA draft. So there's a lot of teams, like Brian made reference to, at the top of this draw in this region who could all potentially be tournament favorites to win the whole thing. Illinois, obviously one of the favorites. Dasumu headlined there along with Coburn. So what do you have to add?
I mean, just looking quick. 2 teams that stand out is Illinois and Oklahoma State. Both, I think, can compete for a national championship because, like you said, Illinois has been playing the best basketball, like Ayo Dasumu and Kofi Coburn, even though it's spelled Cockburn, but both great players and playing amazing basketball. West Virginia, like you said, they're a great team all around. And there's a lot of sneaky teams too, like Syracuse. Like they get hot with Jim Boeheim and his son Buddy. They could potentially pull up some upsets.
And I think again, if we're looking at upsets, that's a game where San Diego State, a team that hasn't seen a lot of top tier opponents throughout the season, going up against that Syracuse zone defense, which has a reputation of causing problems in the tournament. I think that's a game that could absolutely be an upset if you're looking for those.
And then 2 other teams that interest me is Houston, like you already mentioned. They have the Kansas transfer, Quentin Grimes, which has been the main reason for their success. And then I don't know if this is New Jersey bias, but at the beginning of the season, they look good in Rutgers. They have Ron Harper Jr., who's been playing some good basketball. Geo Baker. I mean, I don't know how far they'll go, but because like they're also still like getting their foot in the door and like starting to establish themselves as a program. But I could see them upsetting Clemson, and that's maybe about it, just because Clemson's been playing shaky, and then that one bad game where I don't remember who they played, but they lost pretty badly in a game they should have won. But I think the most interesting game in terms of story. I feel like this conference just has the most storylines of like Illinois, best team in basketball lately. Can they get it done? Um, Oklahoma State, the Cade Cunningham show, like most likely consensus number one pick, player of the year. And but I think the best game is the Loyola Chicago Georgia Tech game. I mean, we're all familiar with the run Loyola Chicago had, and as we started recording this, there was a notification that Sister Jean, the 101-year-old sister, will be traveling to watch the team. So that could be the spark plug Loyola Chicago is looking for. And then the opposite end, Georgia Tech, their starting point guard, Jose Alvarado, the senior. A big knock on him is that he's 6 foot, but he just makes up for it in so many different ways. I mean, the ACC, as a UNC fan, has probably been the most like conference games I've watched this year, and just watching this kid play is like, wow, like he truly represents the game of college basketball. He plays both sides of the court, and he's so fast and elusive too. And just with his defense and Georgia Tech, very good defensive team, they can cause problems and they can get in the head of some star players. So they play very physical, tough basketball.
A game that I have my eye on is specifically the Tennessee-Oregon State game, which is another 5-12 game. And Oregon State is, I get that a lot of people may not watch the Pac-12 for its basketball necessarily, but, Oregon State coming into the conference tournament as a 5 seed really needed to win the tournament to get into the NCAA tournament. And they're able to win their conference tournament. They knocked out a lot of quality opponents on the way. I believe they beat both Oregon and they beat Colorado on their path to their conference tournament win. So they're coming into the tournament now with momentum as well, much like Georgetown did. And they're going to be going up against a Tennessee team who, frankly, I know they have some star power at the top of their rotation, but overall, I'm not crazy about the way that Tennessee looks for a deep run. And I think that this is a game that I could potentially see an upset happening for Oregon State.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, the Pac-12 has been kind of like, it hasn't been up to usual standard because usually they have like one or two good teams, but like it's
and I mean this year I'm not taking anything away from the USC or Oregon or Oregon or any other teams along those lines, but I mean when we talk about an Oregon State team that had to go throughout their whole conference tournament in order to get into the NCAA, the big bracket tournament, I think it's an accomplishment much like we saw Georgetown pull off, and I could see the same thing said for Oregon State here as a potential upset team to keep an eye on against Tennessee in that first round.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree.
All right. So that being said, we've gone through each region. So Brian, what's your final 4 pick here?
All right. So my final 4 is from the West. I got Gonzaga.
Remaining undefeated into the final 4. All right. I like it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Gonzaga, like they've some people have knocked on Gonzaga for their schedule, but they've still played good teams like West Virginia. Like it's not like they just play their terrible conference. No, like they've played some ranked opponents and they've beaten them in convincing fashion, like double-digit wins. So, and I think just like that dynamic, like that big 3 and maybe even big 4 if you want. I just think that they can win it in a not as strong conference and get there. From the East Conference, I mean, this was the toughest one for me, honestly. But I think I had Florida State because I had like different brackets. Like I changed mine up every time for this one. But for this one, I had Texas. I had Texas because I was believing in Kai Jones, the defensive like power that the Big 12 brings. I had Texas in the East. In the South, I had Baylor. They're also a very good team. Although, the Baylor, assuming Baylor beats Hartford and North Carolina beats Wisconsin, I think the winner of that goes to the Final Four because UNC got hotter on the late time, and they're the best rebounding bigs, and Caleb Love's been playing good. So I think I could see them going deep. But and then for the Midwest, I have Oklahoma State actually. I'm a big believer, and if you have the star player, they'll stay hot and do whatever it takes. And I mean, you saw it with John Moran a couple years ago. I mean, they only made it to the second round, but it was Murray State, considered one in the Ohio Valley Conference, one of the worst conferences in Division I basketball. But this time, Cade Cunningham's in the Big 12, one of the best conferences in basketball, and he just seems like no one can contain him. He's going off. I saw his last game where he was just hitting these threes that we're seeing Steph Curry and LaMelo Ball and like Damian Lillard hit today. Like I just think with that type of offense, like
And
there
they're a
could be a
team that's
problem.
capable of coming from behind too. So they're not afraid of getting into trouble or having to come from behind in order to win games either. They're definitely a team that's going to be dangerous in that Midwest Conference.
Oh yeah, 100%.
So who do you have winning it all, and who are they beating?
Uh, I mean, I have Gonzaga beating Oklahoma State.
Interesting. So you have Gonzaga going completely undefeated all the way through the tournament and being crowned the national championships. Wow,
Yeah,
that would be their first NCAA tournament win as well.
yeah, they had that one year in 2017, I believe, where they lost to UNC, and that was a good game. But yeah, I don't know. I have a weird feeling Gonzaga, like because of COVID, it's hard, and like the seeding, it's hard predicting upsets. Honestly, like my upsets, like I wasn't like too like I'm confident in them, but like I obviously see them going the other way. So I'm rolling with Gonzaga.
So for my picks out of the West, I brought it up before how high I am on this team, and I'm going to be picking Iowa. I talked about how much I like Luca Garza and how much I like Joe Wieskamp and Bohannon. And you brought up before the fact that Luca Garza, he struggled in certain games against tough opponents. Yes, that's true, and he's going to need to step up. When they have games in the middle of the season, losses against teams like Illinois or Baylor or other top tier NCAA college teams, it's going to be on his shoulders to not let that happen. It's going to be on his shoulders to not get shut down. I think he's going to be able to pull through in his senior season. And I have Iowa coming out of the West. In the East, I had, in the East, like you said, this is a toss-up region. And for me, it came down to, do I like LSU as a Cinderella story? I could see them potentially making a deep run, coming in as an 8 seed. But at the end of the day, I had to agree with you. I went for Texas, and it was pretty much all the same reasons that you listed before. Kai Jones, I think, needs to step up, and I think he will do that. And I love Shaka Smart as a head coach. Then we go over to the South region. And in that region, Baylor's good, but I think they're beatable. And I really like the way Ohio State has played of late. They lost 4 games in a row prior to going into their conference tournament. That didn't phase them at all. They were still able to go into the Big Ten tournament and take Illinois all the way into overtime in that game. So I have them coming out of the South. And then in the Midwest, I am going to also be having a 3 seed here come out of the West, West Virginia, Bob Huggins. I think it's a combination of that Bob Huggins defense that is always so good, along with a team in West Virginia that is finally an offensive threat. I think that's the formula where they could potentially make a deep run and get into the Final Four, led by Taz Sherman, Miles McBride, a couple other guys there as well. And in that final, I'm going to have the Iowa Hawkeyes over the West Virginia Mountaineers. That's the final that I'm predicting. And I think that Iowa is going to come out on top. I've made reference to it. I'm a Luca Garza fan, so maybe I'm a little partial in that sense, but I think that they do have the tools and the players to get it done this season. Those are my picks. So now let's get into some talk about individual players here. And this was an idea that you brought up, Brian, to potentially do. And we're going to talk about players who need to have a good tournament or need to have a good showing in the tournament in order to improve their draft stock when it's time for the NBA selections. So you want to just go back and forth here? You do a player, I do a player. Each of us have 3 here. So I'll let you kick it off.
All right, so the first player I think with like the most to prove is Kofi Coburn out of Illinois. He was under the radar. No one really thought how he was going to fit in with Illinois. I mean, no, he's always been like an average, like good player, but then this was his breakout year. He's averaging 17.6 points per game, 1.2 blocks per game, 9.6 rebounds per game. So almost a double-double. And he's just been making some athletic plays. He's a great rebounder. He's tough, physical. Right now, he's kind of slated in that late first round, second round talent in the NBA draft. But I honestly believe he balls out, Illinois makes a deep run, like say Elite 8 or later, that he could be a mid-round first-round pick.
The thing that's interesting about him is I'm just worried about how his game translates to the NBA. He doesn't really shoot the 3 ball at all. He's a poor free throw shooter. And, that's just really not the game is going. But, I mean, you're right. Coburn, he is a big presence down low. My first player that I'm going with is Cameron Thomas, who's the guard out of LSU. This season, he's been averaging 22 points a game, 3.4 rebounds, and 1.4 assists. So he's a guy where, I want to see some output from him specifically. And, you look at the guys he's playing along. He's playing along Javonte Smart. He's playing alongside Who's that other guard here? There, he's slipping my mind.
I don't remember.
It's Watford. Watford is
Oh yeah,
the other
Watford,
guard I'm thinking of. Watford is the other guard I'm thinking. I have it written down right in front of me, and I'm asking you. And he's playing along those two guys. So I think that LSU, like I brought up before, have the potential to at least win their first round game and give Michigan a run for their money. I want to see him step up, be a consistent playmaker for this LSU team, and be leaned upon. I don't want to just see that you can put up 20 points a game. I want to see in crunch time, can you get it done? And I think that's going to help his draft stock potentially get him out of, a late first round pick to into the mid first round pick. And depending on how he plays, who knows? Maybe he can even catapult himself into potentially being a lottery pick.
Another player I think is Dasumu, the point guard from Illinois. He's been playing lights out, averaging 20.7 points per game, 5.3 assists per game, 6.3 rebounds per game, while shooting 38% from the three. And he also plays defense, averaging 1.1 steals per game. He's one of the most complete players in college basketball right now. Some people view him, like some college basketball fans view him as point guard number 2 in the draft behind Cade, but they have him well past that. They have guys like Jalen Suggs and then Jalen Green from the G League ahead of him. So, I mean, Dasumu, he's proven himself this year. I think he's one of the best guards in college basketball, and he just got announced today as first team all conference or
he was an All-American. Yeah,
All-American. Yeah.
Yep. The next player that I have is Luca Garza. I've made so many references to Luca. You can tell I'm a fan of Luca Garza, and I think generally he needs to be getting more of a look. I get that he's 22 years of age. Hey, that's younger than Obi Toppin on the Knicks right now. And when you look at his size as well, he stacks up 6'11", 265. That's bigger than Miles Turner of the Pacers. So this guy's got to build. I get that his game has question marks, but this season he's shooting above 40% from three-point. He's also been averaging 23.7 points per game, 8.8 rebounds, and 1.8 assists. So, this is a guy who's also a complete player. And I get that when he has tough assignments, sometimes he has off games. But the disrespect to not even be considering him as at least a second-round pick, I think if he has a good tournament and he can take Iowa on a deep run and beat some good teams, I think he's absolutely going to get looks in at least the second round. And I think it's going to help him improve his stock.
I mean, I wholeheartedly agree. So when I was looking at mock drafts, I was seeing that Luca Garza was towards like the early or mid second round, and I was shocked that he honestly might not be a late first. But I think if Iowa goes,
that's exactly what I'm saying. Like I saw a mock today that had him. He wasn't even drafted. I'm like, this doesn't even make sense. It's not. To me, it's not even valid at that point.
Yeah, I don't think Luca Garza is that bad of a player where he's not even going to be in the top 60 picks next year.
I get the concerns about him, and I get that there's parts of his games that you can be concerned about, but there's no one facet of his game that's like, well, that's absolutely the reason why he's not going to be, why he's not going to be translatable to the pros. He's got enough of everything where he needs to at least get a look by a team. And you're right. I think he's going to be at least a second round pick. And I think with a good showing in the tournament, he could potentially be, early second, potentially even late first.
Yeah. And I mean, you bring up the age, and unfortunately, as a struggling Knicks fan, you brought up the Obi Toppin comparison. But the difference is with Garza and Toppin is I think Garza has, I mean, Obi Toppin is like always like this like great guy, like wanting to help the Knicks and whatever. But with Luca Garza, you can see the passion in his game. And I mean, I don't think Obi's not doing this because I think he is, because apparently he's like working great. But with Garza, the age is a big concern. But I think he's willing to fix it, especially with his size and athletic ability. I think he can work on whatever issues he's having in his game. And I think whatever team takes the chance on him, he'll be in a good situation and they'll work with him to help him succeed.
I agree. I think he's definitely going to get a look. Who's your third player? Or no, this would be your third player, right?
Third player, yeah.
Third player, yeah.
So for my third player, I have Jose Alvarado, as I mentioned earlier, the point guard from Georgia Tech. 15.3 points per game, 3 steals per game, which is insane. 4.1 assists while shooting 38% from three. And it's like all stats aside, his stats are obviously good. But the biggest takeaway I have for Jose Alvarado is the heart he brings to the game, which we haven't really seen. Before they played in the conference final, he twisted his ankle and he didn't want to come out. And that's just the heart he brings. And after the game when he won and pretty much saved Georgia Tech with a clutch steal at the end. He started crying in the interview, and he was like, my family was out there, my kid was out there, and I just want to do this for them. And he's a senior, and he's 6 foot, and he shows that it's not the heart of the dog, it's the heart of the fight. Or I forgot how the expression goes, but
Yeah, it's not about the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog.
yeah, my bad. But
Yeah, not the size of the dog, but the size of yeah. I think our listeners are gonna get the comparison you're making there, Brian.
yeah, but yeah, no, I just think that this kid brings it all. I mean, he's not going to go undrafted. He's projected to go undrafted. I think even if he does go undrafted, because that's a possibility, I think this kid deserves a summer league invite.
And who knows, with a good output in the tournament, if he can, win Georgia Tech a game or two, maybe he does get a look as a second round pick.
Mm-hmm.
The final player that I have here is Kai Jones. This is a guy who I think kind of came into the season and people were expecting him to sort of be one of those players who was a bit of a lottery pick, and that was the expectation. His season's been a little underwhelming. I mean, he's been a great defensive player, no doubt, but offensively, he's put up 8.8 points per game, 4.9 rebounds per game, and I don't even think he's averaging 1 assist a game. But at the center position, he's a guy where he's kind of fallen back into the mid-late first round. For a team like Texas, who's a little undersized, they need a guy like him to absolutely just step up and be that physical force down under, which I no doubt think he can do. And I'm also going to need to see that offensive output from him. If he can get offensive output going on this Texas team that has other players as well, coached by Shaka Smart, and they can make a deep run in this tournament, I think he could absolutely help himself raise his draft stock into potentially being a lottery pick. Because like I said, currently, I think he's more expected to be a late first round pick. I think he could work his way back up earlier in the draft.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. He's definitely a player. He was one of the few players I was considering too, because there's like so many options here. But yeah, Kai Jones, I expect him to do good things. And Texas has always been good with developing their big men. They had not too long ago Jared Allen, who's now the big man on the Cavaliers, I believe, from that from the Harden trade. But yeah, I think Kai Jones can easily work his way up to the mid round in the first.
So any final thoughts, Brian, before we close out this episode?
I have a question for you actually, and then
Sure, go ahead.
I'll give you my answer after you answer. But what team do you think has the most to prove in this tournament?
The most to prove in this tournament? That's a good question. I think the team with the most to prove, you're going to have to give me a second on this one. It's an interesting question because when we talk about most to prove, obviously there's a couple 1 seeds where I'm like, all right, well, I got to see, can you do this? But ultimately, I think my answer is going to come down to, Alabama at this point. I get that they've won the SEC, but you're in a conference that's wide open. And if you're the 2 seed and if you're a true, SEC champion and you want to be considered a basketball school along with your football prestige, you brought up Colin Sexton before. They've made some tournament runs recently and they've been a relevant basketball team lately. If you're Alabama in that wide open Eastern region, I need to see you make a deep run, frankly, to prove to me that you're a legit basketball school, to prove to me that you're a legit contender in this tournament.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely one of the teams I was thinking about. But I mean, for me, I think it's Virginia. I mean, yeah, they won the national championship a few years ago, but then they also had arguably the worst March Madness loss when they got bounced to a 16 seed. And it's kind of been the up and down struggle with COVID this year. So like you have to see how you can battle with that, because obviously COVID happens, it affects teams, but now it's at this point, it's how good teams are evaluated on 2 factors. One, how good of a team you actually are and how you play, and then how you're handling COVID. Because there's some teams that handled it pretty well, and then there's other teams like Virginia and Duke where it's costed them a chance to be a higher seed in the tournament or be in the tournament. And there's been not a lot of knocks on head coach Tony Bennett, really questioning, is he a good coach or does he just use his top tier talent? And so that's why I think Virginia has to prove that they're really for sure and that they can handle COVID and do well.
I get your argument. I wouldn't be as hard on Virginia because of the fact that they did because of the fact that they did, win the national championship a few years ago. And I'm never going to knock a coach in a year when you are dealing with COVID like this, frankly, for any school. I think it's one of those things where, unless you have unless there's some crazy extenuating circumstances, I don't really see a reason why you fire a coach in a year like this where you're dealing with COVID and so many other circumstances. You could talk about Richard Pitino in Minnesota. I mean, to fire him in a year like this where you're dealing with COVID and all these other circumstances, just trying to keep your players safe, frankly. I don't know if you should if you should be knocking coaches for that, but I get what you're saying. Virginia, as the 4 seed, still have that talent there. Kihei Clark, the senior. I believe Huff's still there as well, right?
What?
I believe Huff's still there as well. I mean, they have some players there. So I get what you're saying. And, where they're seated, I could definitely see them making a run in a potential matchup with Gonzaga to come should they win their first couple rounds. So interesting choice for sure. So
I mean, I don't think. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I mean, I don't think Tony Bennett, if that's what you thought, then I don't think Tony Bennett should get fired or punished at all. I'm just saying that there's been knocks about where he ranks in terms of college coaches. Some people believe he's a top 5 coach. I personally don't think so. So that's what
I get it. You're looking for him to prove that he can make a run with maybe lesser talent than he's had in years past.
Yes, that's my argument.
All right, I could side with that. Sounds good, Brian. So this was fun. I think we laid it all out there for our listeners, what to expect in March Madness. Any final thoughts before we head out?
I mean, I'm just looking forward to the tournament. If my UNC team gets, I just want every game to be close and fun, like I expect to be. And I wish nothing but, and for the players just to have fun, stay safe. It's going to be weird. I don't even know what the celebration will look like for whoever team wins. Will they still cut the nets down? Will everyone pass the trophy around, kissing it and stuff? I know for our mayors, the women's team did that when they won the MAC, but they had masks on. So it's all a bunch of question marks of what the celebration will look like. But I just wish for a fun tournament with a lot of great games.
It's an interesting tournament for sure. In 2019, we didn't get a ton of upsets. And, this is a draw where I think, there is the possibility where we could see those upsets come back into the tournament as a regular. So like you said, you summed it up perfectly. I'm looking forward to the start. I think most people are. It's been tough not having it last year. And, thank you all for listening. I've been Nick Vete alongside with Brian Ramos. Everybody have a good rest of your day, wherever you're listening from. Take care now.